All right, so I bet you've been hearing a ton about these GLP-1 medications lately and how they're like revolutionizing weight loss. But, you know, you're probably like us. You want to kind of get past all the hype and really see like what the science is actually saying.
Right, and that's what we're hoping to do today. We've got a bunch of videos here from this doctor, and he seems to really know what he's talking about. Board certified, treats these conditions all the time, and he's actually been living with type 1 diabetes himself for over 30 years.
Oh, wow.
So, it's really interesting. You're getting that real world experience, but also, a lot of solid medical knowledge.
Yeah, the best of both worlds. So let's let's jump into these videos and see what we can pull out for you guys. Okay, so first up, the big question. How do these GLP-1 medications actually work?
So
Right.
I think what's really fascinating here is that GLP-1s, they kind of hack your body's fullness signals in a way by working on both your brain and your stomach. So you can kind of think of it as a two-pronged approach.
Okay, two-pronged approach. I'm intrigued. Break that down for me.
Okay, so on the one hand, GLP-1s, they activate these receptors in your brain that basically tell you like, hey, you're good, you're satisfied, no need to eat more right now. And this is actually one of the reasons why people who take GLP-1s find that those cravings for, sugary snacks or those salty snacks, they're just not as intense anymore.
So it's not just like willpower. It's like
yeah.
the medication is actually changing how your brain is responding to food.
Exactly. And then the second prong of the approach happens in your stomach. So GLP-1s actually slow down how quickly your stomach empties, which means that food stays in there longer. So you end up feeling fuller for a longer period of time, even if you've eaten less than you normally would.
So it's like the double whammy. You feel full faster and then you stay full longer. I mean, no wonder people are seeing results with this. But I have to ask, I feel like some people might hear this and think, hold on a second. Is this a magic bullet? Am I just taking this medication and that's it? It's an easy way out, you know? Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's something that this doctor actually addresses really directly in these videos. He makes it very clear that GLP-1 medications are tools. They're not magic bullets.
Okay.
So they can be incredibly effective. But their power is really amplified when you combine them with lifestyle changes.
So it's not about the medication doing all the work. It's about the medication making it easier for you to do the work.
Yeah, and he's really passionate about this idea. He talks about using GLP-1s as a support system to build those lasting healthy habits. It's not about a quick fix. It's about, making changes that you can stick with, even after you maybe eventually come off the medication.
That makes a lot of sense. And it seems like he also emphasizes some really specific lifestyle changes. Like he is a big proponent of protein. So what is the deal with that? He talks a lot about how when you lose weight quickly, there's always that risk of losing some muscle mass along with the fat that you're losing. And so getting enough protein can actually help to protect against that. And what I thought was really interesting is that he actually suggests calculating your protein needs based on your ideal body weight, not your current weight.
That's such a good point, because you don't want to set yourself up with like unrealistic expectations as you progress.
Exactly. He also talks a lot about movement. And, he's not just talking about hitting the gym 5 days a week or anything like that. He's saying even just adding in like a 10-minute walk after meals can actually make a real difference. Those little things, they add up.
I love that. Small changes, big impact.
Right.
He also mentions this idea of mindful eating. What does he mean by that?
So think of mindful eating as a way to really tune in to your body's signals. So it's about slowing down, savoring each bite, and really paying attention to how full you feel. And this actually becomes even more important when you're taking GLP-1s. Because remember, they're slowing down your digestion. So if you eat too fast, you might end up feeling uncomfortably full later on.
Yeah.
Because your body hasn't had time to catch up.
It's about giving yourself a chance to recognize those fullness signals, especially since the medication is changing how quickly you're digesting. That makes sense. But I know that, some people are still going to have some concerns, maybe even fears about taking a medication for weight loss. One of the big ones I hear is about muscle loss. Is that a valid concern?
Yeah, and he actually addresses that head on. He explains that while rapid weight loss can lead to muscle loss if you take a more gradual approach, and you're combining that with getting enough protein and maybe doing a little bit of resistance training, that could really help you preserve that muscle mass.
There's also that whole argument that some people make that if you're using medication for weight loss, it's like you're not really working for it. Like it's somehow cheating. How does he respond to this?
He acknowledges those feelings for sure, but he really argues that GLP-1 medications, they don't replace effort. They actually make the effort more effective.
Okay.
So it's about lowering that barrier
Yeah.
to making those lifestyle changes. And
Yeah.
like we were just talking about, he's such a big advocate for combining the medication with those changes.
So it's like you're getting this extra support system
Oh,
to kind of help you succeed.
right.
It doesn't do the work for you, but it can maybe make the process feel less overwhelming, which I think a lot of people can relate to. Okay, so we've got how GLP-1s work, why lifestyle changes are still so important. He also goes into this thing called A1C, which I remember being really confused about for a while. And A1C measures long-term blood sugar control.
Right. And this can be tricky, but he breaks it down in a way that I think makes it a lot easier to understand. He explains that A1C basically reflects your average blood sugar levels over the past 3 to 4 months. So if you've just started a GLP-1, or you've made some changes to your diet or something, those changes might not show up in your A1C result right away.
Oh.
It takes time, for those new healthier blood sugar levels to kind of factor into that average.
So there's kind of a delay between the changes you're making and how they're actually reflected in your A1C.
Exactly. But even if they're not immediate, those changes are still happening.
Yeah, they're still happening. Okay, that's an important thing to keep in mind. So we've covered how GLP-1 medications work, the importance of those lifestyle changes, and we've tackled a couple of those common misconceptions. But now, let's get to the elephant in the room, side effects. I know this is a major concern for a lot of people. What does this doctor have to say about that?
So he is very upfront about the fact that there can be side effects, but I think he also does a good job of putting them in perspective. So he explains that serious side effects are actually pretty rare, but it is important to be aware of them. He even shows some of the statistics to kind of illustrate this and breaks down, how to understand those numbers so they don't seem so scary.
So he's not trying to sugarcoat anything, but he's also not trying to freak people out.
Exactly. And I think what he stresses is that for many people, the potential benefits of GLP-1s really outweigh the risks, especially when you compare those risks to the risks of staying overweight or obese.
Right. It's all about weighing those risks and benefits for your own individual situation. But let's get specific. What are some of the most common side effects that people might experience?
So some of the common ones he talks about are nausea, constipation, and what he calls sulfur burps, which, let's be honest, doesn't sound too pleasant.
Not the most appealing side effects. But does he offer any tips for managing these?
He does. So for nausea, he recommends staying really well hydrated, eating smaller, more frequent meals, and really paying attention to which foods, if any, might be triggering your symptoms, so you know. It's really about figuring out what works for your body. For constipation, he can't stress enough how important fiber is, both soluble and insoluble fiber.
Okay, quick reminder. What's the difference between those two?
Okay, so soluble fiber, that's the kind that dissolves in water and forms this kind of gel-like substance in your gut, which helps to keep things moving smoothly. Insoluble fiber, on the other hand, doesn't dissolve in water, but it adds bulk to your stool, which also helps promote regularity.
So you need both kinds.
You do?
For a happy gut. What about those dreaded sulfur burps? Any advice for those?
So he suggests a couple things. You might want to try swapping out cruciferous veggies like broccoli and Brussels sprouts. Those can be big culprits. For things like peas and carrots. He also mentions that for some people, lactose intolerance can actually play a role. So paying attention to your dairy intake could be helpful.
Again, it's about listening to your body and seeing what works for you.
Exactly. It's a process of trial and error.
Yeah.
And your doctor can be a great resource, as you figure things out. He also talks about how people who are taking GLP-1s tend to experience less what's called postprandial somnolence, which is basically that sleepy feeling you get after you eat a big meal.
Oh, the food coma.
Yeah.
I know that one. Why would that happen less on GLP-1s?
So it has to do with insulin spikes. So those big meals, they often lead to this big surge of insulin, which can make you feel really drowsy. But because GLP-1s slow down digestion, and because people tend to eat less on them, that insulin spike is much smaller. So you don't get hit with that same wave of sleepiness.
That's so interesting. I've actually noticed that I've been feeling less sluggish after meals since I started taking a GLP-1.
That's great.
Yeah. It's amazing how everything is connected. But we've been focusing a lot on weight loss. And it's important to remember that GLP-1s were actually originally developed for diabetes management.
That's right. He's really clear about that throughout these videos. He explains how GLP-1s work on your pancreas to increase both insulin production and insulin sensitivity. So it's this two-pronged approach to regulating blood sugar.
So they're doing double duty, helping your body produce more insulin, but then also use the insulin that it makes more effectively.
Yeah.
That's why they can be so helpful for people with type 2 diabetes. But here's what I'm really curious about. He also talks about how GLP-1 medications are being used for things beyond weight loss and diabetes. And this is where I think things get really interesting.
Right. There are all these new potential applications that are being explored,
Yeah.
which is really exciting.
What are some of the things that he highlights?
So one example he talks about is semaglutide, which is a specific GLP-1 medication that was recently FDA approved for treating sleep apnea.
Wow. That's a pretty big deal. How are those two connected?
So obesity and sleep apnea, they're often linked. Because that excess weight, especially around the neck, can obstruct your airways while you're sleeping, which leads to those pauses in breathing. So by helping people lose weight, semaglutide can actually indirectly improve those sleep apnea symptoms.
So it's like you're tackling the root cause of the problem,
exactly.
not just masking the symptoms.
That's fantastic. That's really just the beginning. He also touches on the potential long-term neuroprotective effects of GLP-1s, which is really interesting.
Okay. Now we're getting into some really fascinating territory. What's the science behind that?
So it's still early days in the research, but there's growing evidence that suggests that GLP-1 medications might actually help to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
And they might also help to limit that brain damage that can be caused by high blood sugar, which is obviously a major concern for people with diabetes.
So in addition to weight loss, in addition to blood sugar control, now we're talking about potentially protecting the brain in the long run.
Yeah, it's really amazing.
That's incredible.
There's even more. He also talks about how GLP-1s can lead to improved mental clarity.
Okay, how does that work?
So he attributes it to a few things. You've got the better blood sugar control. You've got the fact that people on GLP-1s tend to make healthier food choices overall. And then there's also this reduction in that kind of brain fog feeling that all people experience. So all of that kind of contributes to a sharper, more focused mind.
It's like they're lifting this veil and allowing your brain to function at its best.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. He even touches on the potential mood-boosting effects of GLP-1 medications.
Okay. Now, that's something I think everyone can get behind. Is there any science to support that, or is it just anecdotal?
It's probably a combination of things. So weight loss itself can boost your mood, plus GLP-1s may reduce inflammation in the brain, which can also contribute to feeling happier and more emotionally balanced.
Wow. We have covered a lot of ground already. And this is just, I feel like, the tip of the iceberg. This doctor, I mean, he goes deep into the science, the benefits, the risks, the practical aspects of taking these GLP-1 medications. It's not just like a quick overview. It's a very comprehensive look at what these medications can do.
Absolutely. And he doesn't shy away from the complexities at all. But he presents everything in a way that I think is both informative and easy to understand.
He has a real talent for making very complex science accessible. But we are going to have to pause here for now. We have so much more to discuss, including some really fascinating insights into how GLP-1s can actually rewire the brain's reward system. We'll dive into that and more in part 2 of our deep dive into GLP-1 medications.
Looking forward to it. There's a lot more to uncover. Welcome back.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to learn about these medications.
Oh no, right.
Before we took a break, we were starting to talk about how GLP-1s can actually rewire the brain's reward system, which sounds pretty intense. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah. So this is where things get really interesting. You know how certain foods, especially those super processed ones that are loaded with sugar and fat, can just be incredibly tempting.
Absolutely.
Almost impossible to resist.
Some of those foods are like my kryptonite.
Right. So he talks about how when you eat those kinds of foods, you get this rush of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that's associated with pleasure and reward. So it's like your brain is giving you a high five for consuming those calories.
I mean, it makes sense. Like way back in the day when food was scarce, you would want to eat as much as you could.
Yeah.
You found it to make sure you had enough energy.
Right. Exactly. But in today's world, where we're surrounded by these highly palatable foods, that reward system can actually kind of backfire. It can lead to overeating and these intense cravings. They're really tough to overcome.
So how do GLP-1 medications fit into all of this?
So he explains that GLP-1s actually work to dampen those dopamine spikes that you get from those really tempting foods. So you might still enjoy them, but they're not as intensely rewarding, which makes them less tempting.
It's like turning down the volume on those cravings.
Yeah, that's a really good way to think about it.
Yeah.
And, over time, as those cravings lessen, it becomes easier to focus on. eating for nourishment and for energy,
Mm.
rather than just for that pleasure rush.
So it's not just about suppressing your appetite. It's about like fundamentally changing your relationship with food.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he even suggests that this shift can actually lead to feeling more in control around food, more empowered. It's not this constant battle of willpower anymore. It's a more balanced way of approaching eating.
I love that. It's like
No.
you're finally making peace with food. He
Right.
also goes into some really interesting detail about how GLP-1s affect digestion.
Yeah.
You know, beyond just what we talked about, with the stomach emptying more slowly.
Yes.
Wow.
So he talks about how GLP-1s influence these two key hormones that are involved in appetite, peptide YY or PYY, and then ghrelin. Okay, so PYY is released by your gut after you eat,
Ah.
and it tells your brain, like, hey, you're full, you're good. Ghrelin, on the other hand, is produced in your gut, but it actually stimulates your appetite.
Okay. So they're like the two sides of the hunger coin.
Exactly. And he explains that. GLP-1s, they don't directly target PYY, but they actually enhance its effects because, digestion is slower. So this gives PYY more time to do its job, sending those I'm full signals to the brain.
It's like giving those fullness signals a boost.
Right. And when it comes to ghrelin, GLP-1s actually help to suppress its production.
Oh, wow.
So there's less of that I'm hungry hormone circulating in your system.
So it's a double whammy on those cravings, but it sounds like these changes don't happen overnight.
Right. He emphasizes that it takes time for that communication between your gut and your brain to adjust. It's not an instant fix. It's a gradual process.
You're training your body to understand and respond to its own natural hunger and fullness cues, which makes a lot of sense. It's not a quick trick. It's about like creating a lasting change, which is actually really encouraging to hear because it suggests that these medications could have benefits that last even after you stop taking them.
That's exactly what he seems to be saying. And he's actually really big on this idea of taking a gradual approach to weight loss. And not just for that reason.
Okay, what other benefits does he see in that slower approach?
Well, he explains that when you lose weight too quickly, your body can kind of freak out a little bit and go into what he calls starvation mode, where it starts clinging to every calorie that it can.
It's like your body thinks it's in a famine situation.
Exactly. And that can actually lead to your metabolism slowing down.
Yeah.
And then potentially rebound weight gain later on.
So slower and steadier wins the race when it comes to weight loss.
That seems to be his philosophy.
Yeah.
He also reminds us that while the scale can be helpful, it's not the only measure of progress.
Yeah.
Sometimes you might be losing fat without seeing a dramatic shift on the scale.
That's such a good point. I've definitely had those times where I've been like, I feel great, my clothes are fitting better, but the scale just won't budge.
Yeah. He talks about that too. He explains that GLP-1 medications can actually specifically target visceral fat, which is the kind of fat that accumulates around your organs.
That's the really dangerous kind of fat.
It is. It's linked to, higher risk of all sorts of health problems, heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and because visceral fat is actually less dense than the fat that's right under your skin, which is called subcutaneous fat. You might actually be losing inches and improving your health without seeing a huge change on the scale.
So it's about looking beyond just the number.
Yeah.
And really paying attention to how you feel, how your clothes fit, your overall well-being.
Exactly.
We've been focusing a lot on the positive side of GLP-1s, but I know that this doctor doesn't shy away from, the potential downsides, as we talked about earlier. That can be side effects.
Right. And he acknowledges that.
Yeah.
Side effects are a real possibility. And he goes into quite a bit of detail about some of the most common ones, like we talked about. Nausea, constipation, and those sulfur burps.
Yeah. Those are definitely not fun. But he does offer some, practical advice for managing them.
Right. So for nausea, he recommends staying really well hydrated, eating those smaller, more frequent meals, and trying to figure out which foods, if any, might be triggering your symptoms.
It's about finding what works for you.
Exactly.
What about constipation? Any tips for that?
Fiber. He can't stress that enough.
Yeah.
Both soluble and insoluble.
I think we should do a quick reminder on what the difference is between those two.
Okay, so soluble fiber is the kind that dissolves in water, and it creates this kind of gel-like substance as it moves through your digestive tract, which helps to keep things moving along smoothly. Insoluble fiber, on the other hand, doesn't dissolve, and it adds bulk to your stool, which also helps promote regularity.
So you really need both kinds. For a healthy gut,
You do it.
does he give any examples of good sources of fiber?
Oh, yeah. He loves berries, apples, avocado, sweet potatoes. He even mentions popcorn for insoluble fiber.
Oh, popcorn. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's a surprisingly good source of fiber.
Yeah.
But of course, he stresses that if you're experiencing, any persistent or severe side effects, it's really crucial to talk to your doctor.
Right. They can help you, you know, adjust your medication, adjust your lifestyle to try to minimize those side effects.
Exactly. It's a team effort.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to me how these medications can have such a profound impact on both our physical and our mental health.
I know. It's amazing.
And he actually goes even deeper into the science behind GLP-1s, explaining how they actually work at the cellular level.
He gets into how GLP-1 medications increase insulin sensitivity,
Right.
which is, a really key factor in blood sugar regulation. He explains that they activate these specific pathways in the body that make your cells more responsive to insulin.
So it's not just about making more insulin. It's about helping your body use the insulin it already has more effectively.
Exactly. And he talks about how this boost in insulin sensitivity can have this ripple effect throughout the body.
Yeah.
Improving your energy levels, reducing inflammation, and potentially even protecting against certain diseases.
It's like optimizing your entire metabolic system.
Right.
He also mentions that GLP-1s can actually increase insulin production, which is especially important for people with type 2 diabetes.
Right, because their bodies aren't producing enough insulin on their own.
Exactly.
So he explains how GLP-1s actually work on the pancreas to stimulate those insulin-producing cells to work harder and more efficiently.
It's like you're giving your pancreas like a little pep talk. This is all so intricate. It's amazing how much is happening beneath the surface.
It really is. And he doesn't shy away from those technical details, but he explains them in a way that I think is still easy to follow.
He's really gifted at making those complex scientific concepts accessible.
I agree.
And he's clearly so passionate about sharing this knowledge with others.
Yeah.
It's contagious. I feel like I'm learning so much. And I know we've still got more to uncover.
Yeah, we do. There's still so much more to discuss, including, the long-term outlook for people who are taking these GLP-1 medications. So we'll delve into that and more in part 3 of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into GLP-1 medications. And, we've talked about how they work, their potential benefits, side effects that you might encounter. I mean, it's a lot to take in.
He really is.
But there's this one big question that I think a lot of people still have, which is, what happens if or when you want to come off these medications?
Yeah, that's a really important question.
So that's what we're going to explore now.
And it's something that, this doctor spends a lot of time talking about.
Okay.
He really wants to help people understand that there's no one-size-fits-all answer here.
Right.
He says that everyone's journey is unique. And the decision of whether or not to come off GLP-1s is a very personal one. That should always be made in consultation with your doctor.
It makes sense that there's not like a blanket recommendation.
Exactly.
It has to be individualized.
And he emphasizes that. The reason why someone's taking a GLP-1 in the first place actually makes a big difference.
Okay.
So for those who are mainly using it for weight loss, his goal is to help them eventually transition off the medication.
So for those people, he kind of sees it as like more of a temporary tool.
That's how he describes it.
Yes.
He sees it as a bridge to a healthier lifestyle, a way to kind of reset your relationship with food so you can learn to eat in a more balanced and mindful way.
It's like you're building up those healthy habits while you have that extra support from the medication.
Exactly.
But he's also very realistic about the challenges that people face when they try to maintain weight loss.
Right.
Especially in our world today, where we're constantly bombarded with, tempting foods and things like that.
He acknowledges that it's not easy
Yeah.
to make those habits stick.
And he doesn't shy away from the fact that some people might need to stay on GLP-1s long term, maybe even indefinitely.
Right. And he stresses that there's no shame in that. For some people, GLP-1s might just be, a necessary part of managing their health, just like any other medication that someone might need to take for a chronic condition.
Right. It's a reminder that there's no one right way to approach this. It's about what works best for you and your health.
Exactly. And he seems to have
a
lot of compassion for people who are struggling with their weight. He understands that it's not just about willpower, that there are these complex biological and environmental factors at play.
And he talks a lot about how GLP-1s can actually change the way your brain perceives food, which we've touched on a bit earlier.
Yeah, he goes into a lot of detail about how they can quiet down those dopamine spikes that you get from those, highly processed, sugary, fatty foods, which makes it so much easier to resist those cravings
Yeah.
and make those healthier choices.
So it's not just about feeling full. It's about like changing how rewarding those unhealthy foods feel.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he even suggests that GLP-1s might actually help you develop new food preferences over time.
Really? How does that work?
You know, as you start eating those healthier foods, while those dopamine spikes are being blunted, you might actually start to find those healthier options more appealing.
Interesting.
It's like your taste buds are recalibrating, learning to appreciate those different flavors.
Like you're retraining your brain to crave the foods that actually nourish your body.
That's a great way to put it. And he believes that this shift in food preferences can actually play a really big role in long-term weight management, even after you might come off the medication.
That's so encouraging to hear. It suggests that these medications could have a lasting impact on your eating habits, not just a temporary effect.
That's definitely the hope.
Yeah.
But, he is careful to say that it's not a guarantee. Some people might find that those old cravings come back once they stop taking the medication.
So it's not a foolproof system, but it sounds like it could be a really powerful tool for creating lasting change.
And he really emphasizes that GLP-1s are just that. They're a tool. They're not a magic solution. They can help to create those healthy habits.
Yeah.
But it's ultimately up to you to maintain them in the long run.
It goes back to what he was saying before about using the medication as a bridge to a healthier lifestyle,
Right.
not relying on it to do all the work for you.
And he reminds us that those key lifestyle changes, eating plenty of protein, moving your body regularly, practicing mindful eating, all of that is essential, whether you're taking a GLP-1 or not.
Those are really the foundation of a healthy life.
Right. And he strongly encourages people
Yeah.
to work really closely with their doctors, to develop that personalized plan, figuring out what works best for their individual needs and circumstances.
That makes sense.
Wow.
You want a plan that's tailored to you, not just some one-size-fits-all approach.
And he really believes that open communication with your doctor is crucial for success.
Yeah.
He sees that relationship as a partnership.
You're working together to create a plan that you feel good about and that you can actually stick with. I'm really struck by this doctor's overall approach to health. It seems very holistic.
I agree.
He's not just looking at the physical aspects of weight loss. He's thinking about the mental and emotional components as well.
Right. He talks about how GLP-1s can improve mental clarity, boost your mood, even enhance your sleep quality.
It's like he's acknowledging that all these different aspects of our health are interconnected.
He really sees the big picture. And he reminds us that, the journey to better health, it's not always a straight line.
Right.
There are going to be ups and downs along the way. But the key is to keep learning, keep trying, and just keep moving forward.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of GLP-1 medications now, and I hope our listeners do too.
I hope so too. Yeah.
And if you're considering starting a GLP-1, definitely talk to your doctor to see if it might be right for you. And remember, as we've discussed throughout this whole deep dive, these medications are most effective when you pair them with those healthy lifestyle changes. And if you're already taking a GLP-1, keep up the great work. You're on your way to a healthier, happier you.
You are.
That wraps up our deep dive into GLP-1 medications. We hope you found this episode informative and engaging. And as always, thanks for listening.